formally like to introduce everyone to our online conference. We have 4 webinars over the next 2 days. A very good mix of different speakers. And today's topic we're going to be looking at is 10 ways to improve customer experience. So I'm delighted to have 2 excellent speakers. We have regulars, in fact, on the Call Center Helper webinar series. Delighted to welcome back Maurice Pentle. Maurice is not only from an organization that sounds absolutely fabulous, the Customer Experience Foundation. I believe, Maurice, you actually founded the Customer Experience Foundation.
For my sins, I did indeed. I felt about 10 years ago that customer experience was going to be a really important thing. And I'm pleased to say 10 years later, I think people are beginning to get the message slightly.
Excellent. And we're also joined today by a regular favorite on our webinars, Richard Farrell from Netcall. Richard is the Chief Technology Officer for Netcall. I think I first spoke with Richard about 10 or 12 years ago, and Richard's got a very broad range of experience across a wide range of different technologies.
Well, we're not old enough to have met that long ago, Jonty.
So yeah, delighted to welcome Richard along, who's going to be looking at some of the ways that technology can help the overall customer experience. So if you'd like to watch a recording of today, it's at callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. If you're not logged into our chat room and you'd like to get a copy of the webinar slides, it would be very worthwhile doing that. You just go to this link here when you're logged in. Well, here's the login page, callcenterhelper.com/chat. Just put in your first name, last name, and email address. It's going to be in a separate window, so you might want the webinar on one side, the chat room on the other. You can also download the chat log, and in this little area down here, you can type in your tips, questions, or just chat with the other members of the audience. And if you'd like to use hashtag tip for a tip, or hashtag question for a question. We do have a rather nice prize of either a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates. Here's one that we've prepared earlier. So this is going to go off. We're going to announce the winners live at the end of today's session. So a nice bottle of champagne, or if you prefer a box of chocolates going out. I can keep the champagne on my desk. The chocolates do tend to get rather eaten, so but we do promise those will be sent out at the end of today's session. So we're asking a question in the chat room. How would you describe your current customer experience? So if you'd just like to put into the chat room how you would describe your current customer experience. And also I'd like to, so while you're doing that, if you could quickly vote on our poll. So what do you map in your organization? Do you map customer journeys? Do you map agent journeys, or do you map process? So it's just, this comes up in the poll box. This is slightly different. Or do you map none of the above? And if you'd like to add any more detail on that, if you'd like to put that into the chat room. So let's just have a look at what I think we've got. Most people have voted there. That's about it. So I'll share the results here. So the sample size for this is 127. 62% analyzing customer journeys, 64% process, 19% agent journeys, and none of the above is 19%. Maurice, that seems quite low in terms of agent journeys.
It does, and I think Richard's going to speak to that as a concern, but the idea that you have loads of complicated windows, that you have things that slow down the agent experience has a huge impact on the experience the customer gets. I am surprised it's that low. I don't know, Richard, what are you?
I thought it would be a little bit higher. I thought more like the 30s. But...
Yeah, it sort of certainly did surprise me on the levels there. The good news is 62% of the audience are analyzing customer journeys. So we've been asking a question in the chat room. How would you describe your current customer experience? Ian says, I'm calling in for a PMI company in Cheltenham, and the results of our customer experience are varied. Susie says, yes, varied. Ian says it's improving. Matthew says, customer experience is rather varied and somewhat confused at times. Nick says, the customer experience so far has been pleasant, which is nice to see. Chloe says, the business I work for is currently making massive changes to our customer experience, with it becoming a main priority. Delighted to hear that for us moving forward, which is why the webinar is going to be very important for us today. Matthew says it is erratic, and this is quite an interesting one, Richard, and it depends upon the channel that is used. So I guess, a number of people are struggling with multi-channel.
Yeah, it's something we see quite often, very great variation between channels.
And quite difficult to join up the channels as well, I see in a lot of organizations.
Well, it can be, but quite often they've been treated in as separate initiatives, silos. We talk a little bit about that later on, actually, in terms of sort of merging together of different channels and media, because our customers expect consistent experiences. And it's interesting that variation is coming up quite a lot as a theme. Varied experience, erratic. So we can help with that.
I think probably is now the time to dive into our 10 ways to improve customer experience. And in fact, quite interesting, the slide there that says, what difference do the channels make? So I think that must have been perfectly lined up there for you, Morris. So would you like to take us through the first of our ideas?
It's certainly a beautiful piece of segue. I think one of the most basic mistakes that organizations make that I see is they fail to express in practical terms the differences between different channels. A good example is, at the moment, we're in a video conference. Seeing my body language provides something like 35 times more information than you get in a text message, and certain channels are more appropriate to different, to different stages, to different emotional states in a customer journey. If I'm in the middle of a major row with my bank, waiting 14 minutes for a one-line text is hardly a good experience. I want to deal with someone face to face. So I think my first point would be, come to a profile of what your channels do well and do badly, and then look about how you join those up. And I know Richard has some views about how to join channels up. I think that's a good starting point. Is there are significant differences between them, and what we need to do is to understand what they are and articulate that.
And I think there are differences not just with the customers using the channels, but also who's on the other end using the channels as well, and that's very important.
I've recently done a piece of research for a large organization, and I have to say that their Twitter feed is about as exciting as their terms and conditions, and their Facebook page is as inspiring as their terms and conditions, and that's hardly the thing that you want. And I see that what you've done there, Jonty, is you've moved us on to our customer journey map. So I wanted to bring this up to make a point. Customer journeys, customer experiences are complicated things. And although it's very important when you're holding a session that you do the basic things of Post-it notes, if you look at what we're talking about when we're discussing customer journey mapping, we're looking about complexity of experience. We're looking about mapping emotional states, about things like customer work. And I'll be talking about both of those a little later. But we're also talking about complexity of understanding. How complicated is the thing you're trying to get me to accept? And will I understand it? all of these things really need to be mapped into our customer journey mapping, and to make things simple for people to understand. And most customer journey maps actually don't have any kind of simplicity model. Is this a simple moment? Is this a complex moment? And what we like to do is we like to ask that question, as it's very helpful in understanding the customer journey. So
if anyone wants to, there's quite a lot of detail on this slide. If anyone wants to see the detail, you can download the slides from the chat room. So if you go to callcenterhelper.com/chat, from there you can log in, and within the chat room there's a link to get a copy of the slides.
So I noticed that James44 has asked the question, use spoken English, not formal written English. No one wants corporate waffle. I will just very quickly tell the story. Lindley will keep me to time. But a colleague of mine from the foundation did a piece of work in America where they got the customers to write the terms and conditions for an American insurance company, and it reduced the number of inbound inquiries into their contact centers by about 20% over the first year. Plain English is really important. Making sure that you're actually answering the questions that people want answered is so important, and the channel, it is also an important part of that. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah, definitely the emotion is very important, and tracking it right the way through by channel, very important. One thing that we've seen very successfully work is to map agent journeys. Interesting that 19% of our audience thought that, or were doing that earlier on. There's a 4-stage process that we've looked at. So customer journey map, agent journey map, review and create new process. And some of the best work we've had with that have been where advisors and agents have been reviewing and creating new processes. So rather than a business analyst coming along with an overlay or a template saying this is how you'll do it, the people on the coalface, the agents, are really best at creating new processes, and then that needs to be agreed throughout the organisation. In terms of the agent journey map, there's obviously lots of cost involved with this. We talk a little bit about multiple systems later on. One thing that's often overlooked is the effort for agents to try and navigate their systems and processes. And it's very hard to spin that plate whilst keeping the customer experience at the forefront. So we make it quite hard for advisors. Sometimes it's quite a complex process as well. And we've got some timings later on that show how that impacts on customer experience. So in our view, the very best possible outcome is that we map both customer and agent journeys. And to some extent, that really depends on whether the organisation is trying to improve or the organisation is trying to change. And so we find lots of topics and lots of projects where people will implement customer experience, when in fact there needs to be a broader and a wider approach to that.
I agree with you, but I would also go further. I think what we do is we take our process maps and we overlay customer experience on that. And I think the best organizations worry about what an experience is and then come back and create the processes around that. And I find that the best organizations do that, not just for the customer, but also for the agent. And I think it's understanding that that's hugely important. It makes a massive difference. So I guess one of the big challenges that leads us to is this question of there's a battle between continuous improvement, things like Six Sigma, and the way that customer experience as a science works. And I think it's a dichotomy I see in more and more organizations. One is about the rigorous application of process improvement, and the other one is about the recognition that the customer will go off and do whatever they want in whatever way they feel is most comfortable and most easy. And it's that classic thing that you can build a path across a park, and the customers will completely ignore the path and make their own, because as customers, we find the easiest way to work. And I think continuous improvement in a lot of the organizations that I've been working with over the last 2 years has been too focused on discipline and not focused enough on using the power of the customer and using the way in which the customers use the systems to drive the opportunity to reduce cost and to improve change. I don't know, Richard, if you've had any experience of that.
Yeah. There was some work a couple of years ago as well that was quite interesting about stop trying to delight your customer, about trying to look at where these boundaries and levels are. And the key to a lot of this is the corporate culture of what they're really getting at. It can't be done alone in the contact center.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and I think there is another thing that one of my great mentors said to me is, if we just stop doing the bad things, we would be giving a significantly better customer experience. So I see that Lindley's very kindly moved us on to the next slide, and this is one of the models that we use when we're looking about our customer relationship. It's called customer work. And the idea of customer work is just how engaged your customers are with you as an organization. And there are a couple of models for this. The first, of course, is Apple. And it's the queues outside the Apple store. It's the Apple customers who are promoting their products. And you'll see that there's the giffgaff logo on this slide, and that's giffgaff famously have very few employees, and the customers do all the work. And so what we've come up with is a very simple model that expresses the level of customer work you've got. So level one is social connection. That means that your customers are prepared to say that they're engaged with your products and service. They may be able to talk about it socially. At level two, what you have is a situation where not only are your customers engaged with your product, but they're actually doing something about it. So one of the amazing things to me is that people will place YouTubes of opening the box of the iPhone 7 and thousands of people will watch it. I've never been to the opening of a box, so I am prepared to speak at a lot of events, but I've never quite gone that far. And then the next level above social action is actually social engagement, and this Apple does very well, and so does giffgaff. And in social engagement, it's where you type in a problem you've got with a particular technology, and up comes an answer, and the answer's been delivered by a user. And then the final piece of the puzzle is where you use that to drive your business. And Apple as an organization and giffgaff as organizations both rely on the increased value of every pound that they spend, because it is amplified by the size of their audience. And it's a huge win. And you'll notice I didn't speak about the guy with the Harley Davidson tattoo on the back of his on his back. The guys at Harley Davidson tell me that, in fact, the guys with tattoos don't spend any money on nice new bikes, and that's not the market they want. So it's not a perfect world. But Richard, I don't know if you socially work for any organizations, any brands that you're involved with?
I must be owed a fortune by Lego, the amount of time I've advocated Lego over the years, and it's exactly in this sort of model. And culturally, as an organization, they realize that it's not pieces of plastic bricks that they're selling, it's experience, it's emotion, it's people's presents, it's Christmas, it's birthdays. And yeah, I sell Lego.
I think Lego is a great example, but it's what it's a great example of is that what we're delivering is a service, and what people are doing is they're using it to meet their own purpose. I don't get on a bus just to get on a bus. I don't go to an ATM just to have the experience of the ATM. What I'm doing is I'm getting on a bus to go somewhere. I'm going to an ATM to get some money out to do something. And Lego's the ultimate leisure example of that. I'm taking their bricks and I'm building my imagination. I'm building an experience, perhaps with a child, or if you're sad and old like me, when you get invited to Lego, you start building the things that you built when you were 6 years old. Richard.
Indeed, and also in the Lego Contact Center, we actually had a chance to visit the Lego Contact Center. There's a very good article on Call Center Helper. If you type Lego into the search box, you'll find what they've been doing in the contact center, which is also very good about building customer experiences.
So if I may, just before we move on, I noticed Charlie 11 has asked the question, isn't customer work just a modern day word of mouth thing? I understand where you're coming from, but what we're saying is word of mouth is one piece, but when the customers are actually impacting your bottom line directly, you need a more granular approach to understanding that. So I do think it's it's some of word of mouth, but we see more and more organizations working with their customers to solve problems, and that has a big impact on the bottom line.
Well, we're asking a question now, poll question, and that is, how often do you update your customer journey maps? Do you open them monthly with customer feedback? Do you do them every 6 months? Do you do it every year? Have you done it never, or you've had a journey map once and has never updated it? Or do you're not sure that you either have a customer journey map or how often it's been updated? So let's have a look. We've got a few more votes to come in now. So just vote on the poll. I'm just going to close the poll now and share the results. Sample size for this is 155. 20% is monthly. 14% every 6 months, 17% every year. So looks like if I added those together, 34, 51. So just over half of the audience have updated their customer journey maps in the past year, which I think is very encouraging. 22% never, 27% don't know. Richard, does that time with some of the things you've seen?
It does. I think monthly is higher than I'd expected, and that's a good number. I think probably the don't know is correlated with our proportion that didn't do journey mapping at all. If most organisations are looking at their journey maps every month, then they should be quite up to speed. What would be your recommendation, Maurice, per interaction?
I think the 20% kind of reflects this idea that we're chasing after the Amazon every contact is a problem thing, and I have to say that from my point of view, it depends on the number of interactions you have. It depends on frequency of interaction. But there is a basic tenet here that What we need to do is to be looking at every customer interaction as something perhaps we could create a review of to see if there's something to improve. Customer behavior is changing so quickly. If you look at the way in which we use apps, if you look at the way in which things are changing behaviorally, it's such a rapid thing. I think if you're looking at it every 6 months, that's too slow. But I'm not sure that I'd necessarily say every month. It does depend organization to organization. And some organizations are tankers. You know, they can start to make a change, but that will take them a very long time to do. So I think that's the challenge.
I think the idea of being able to audit interactions and to see what happened during them is very important. And again, we were talking about variation and erratic responses earlier on. It's really picking up.
I'm sorry, Morris. I'm afraid I can't answer that.
Sorry. Apparently, I'm having a bit of an Apple moment, but I'm going to switch that off. My apologies, everybody. Siri has tried to take control of the conversation. Sorry, Richard, you were saying?
I was just saying about pulling out the outliers, looking at the variation, looking to see if we've got common cause variation. It's something that's part of the system, whether it's a special cause variation, whether it's something that's outside the system.
I agree. I think there is a huge role for consistency of approach, and I know that's something you're very keen on. And anything that's completely outside is probably a red ball or something to be looked at as a priority. Anything that completely falls through the cracks.
So Morris, fancy dresses you've got on the slide in front of you.
I have got fancy dress, and I think that the challenge is, do we really live and breathe customer experience and customer experience journey mapping, or is it simply something that the board talk about in the annual report in order to placate shareholders and customers? And I think there are different stages, and I think at the one end, and I know Richard's going to be talking about this much more, I think at the one end, you have the people who talk about it, and then at the other end, you have people who actually live it and breathe it, and it's a core part of their business. And I don't know if Richard, you want to speak to that, but I find that the difference that we see in this, in terms of everything that one can measure, and we're going to talk about measurement in a little while, I think shows through. And that's not only just in terms of culture, but in terms of the way in which it impacts the bottom line of the business. And hopefully I've avoided there actually talking about the various steps, and I'm going to pass that to Richard to speak to. No?
So we've had a look at a variety of resources, and something that the global analysts agree on is that customer experience is the last differentiator. Interesting to look at our previous survey numbers. Gartner, for example, they think that 89% of companies expect to compete mainly on the basis of customer experience. Forrester have termed it the age of the customer. And what we've got a model here is from Marty's CX, and it really shows the return on investment from aligning customer experience as part of the culture. So if we look at where 87% of organizations are, they're really at early stages from apathy to initial response. Most of our audience today are looking to standardize and solve, and that will improve performance. where organisations align and have customer experiences as part of the culture, the financial rewards are great. They get 3 times the financial performance and loyalty as those organisations in the initial stage. So going back to our brands that we talked about earlier on, Apple are able to charge premium rates to have better customer retention because they have that cultural view on customer experience, whereas others who may use fancy dress will not get the return on investment.
And I think I have a slightly more granular view than our friends at Merit CX. I think there's a point where what you have is customer experience at the heart of your planning, and the next stage of that is where you have it nailed into your financials in every practical sense. And one of the things that I'm endlessly going on about is the financial case for customer experience. If finance isn't part of your customer experience team, then how do you expect them to understand the way a customer experience business case works? And I think that's a hugely important piece of this. So I know from my past experience working in large organizations, the difference between us starting to build a customer experience plan, which is the fancy dress, through to the point where it becomes part of everyone's discussion and language, through to the point where actually you're driving the business and you're driving the financial metrics of the business. I think that's when you know you've really embedded customer experience properly.
Well, so we're running a poll currently about how well you've managed to embed that, and that is, how mature is your customer experience adoption process? Is it aligned, a key part of your strategy? Is it standardizing phase and just in the process of solving processes? Are you learning how to adapt? Is it fancy dress that you've a bit of lip service happening there, or would you rather not say or don't know? So quite interesting. Quite interesting. I'm going to share the results with our speakers. So Morris, this is quite interesting. Only 12% are saying fancy dress. Do you think they're being bashful, or do you think it really has moved on?
I think that if you ask most people, they fit into those first 2 or 3, and perhaps so I think fancy dress, learning to adapt are perhaps a more significant chunk, and the way that the way that we would see customer experience maturity, which is aligned, which you've got at 15%. I think that kind of sits there with the 20% who think that they're doing it well, and it's kind of that number, and everybody else is they're drinking the Kool-Aid, frankly. To some extent, they're talking about it. They think the customer is important, but they also think their next promotion and their balanced scorecard is hugely important.
Okay, so that sounds just the right time to jump across to some tips from the audience to see what lessons can we learn. So let's just have a look at some of the tips that are coming in. Following James 44's conversation about the use of language, Dominic suggests you don't use stock answers that you pre-select, as this doesn't give a personal experience and can feel more like a bot. That could be quite controversial. I quite like doing a combination of stock answers and making them personal. The danger is it's easier to pick a stock answer, so there's a danger of bad habits might come in. Dominic has also said, conduct a customer persona analysis to discover which channels customers use, prefer, or would like to see. Richard, customer persona is quite an interesting an approach.
It is, and it's something that we've recently embarked on internally as well. So we've been getting a lot of advice on creating those. What was very interesting for me to see was we actually mapped our customer journeys for these different personas, because obviously different organizations have different actors playing different roles at different stages. And that was really quite enlightening, looking at our customer journey maps for the different personas and where they get involved with us.
I particularly like personas because it's a sort of very simple way of doing a customer segment. If you take a call recording of a particular customer and say, how can we never have this experience again with Mrs. Patel, and you play the call, then everyone can kind of get that persona, that situation. It tells stories. Chloe says, get opinions and ideas from employees who speak to your customers, clients every day. They'll have their finger on the pulse, knowing what customers are experiencing and therefore what needs to change. I like that one. Nicholas said, tip, how to improve.
If I may just stop you there, Jonty, and go back to that, to the previous one. Getting your front line involved is a hugely important piece. That your customers are telling you what they want you to do, and getting out of the way of that insight and making the most of it is one of those pieces. We talked earlier about how frequently you can change your customer journey map.
Go one step even further. If you want to find out what your customers want, ask them. When you listen to the voice of the customer, you find out some very surprising things that are also often very different from what you were planning to improve. That sounds a bit like your paths across the park type of analogy. You may have your map that your customers will have a different way. Nicholas also says, use your process as a guideline to get somewhere you need to be, but make you fit your customer. Don't make your customers fit your process. I certainly see a lot of that. We'll take a few more before we jump across. Get customers to develop a satisfaction survey themselves. We encourage all customers to come and work with us to help to develop survey questions. I think that ties in with another point that Morris made. Don't focus on process without thought and reference to the customer. That very often happens. Chloe's put another tip. I think Chloe might be wanting to win this bottle of champagne. We've started creating videos to assist customers quickly and visually. These can be shown on YouTube account, but also sent out on emails and communications to customers. I think that's a very, very nice idea. And last step of this section, get your data value exchange right. People will give you personal data that can be used in different channels at any point of customer journeys. If they recognize they will get something valuable back to them. I think there's often a danger that customers share data, but don't necessarily feel they're getting anything valued back from them. So let's go in. We're going to jump across to the next section. And Morris is going to look at how to measure customer experiences. Morris, do you want to take us through?
Indeed. So I think the first thing that I'll say goes back to sorry, we seem to have my screen as being the main screen.
Okay, let's just there we go.
Sorry, Lindsay Lindley still needs to be the screen, Jonty.
Yeah, I think she's got it back.
Yeah, you got it back?
We have.
Okay, yeah. So I think sorry, minor technical failure there. I think there are two pieces. The first is the classic quote from Mr. Drucker: "You can't manage what you don't measure." And there is one salutary story from my experience. So I worked in customer experience in big banks during the financial crisis. And at no time did our net promoter score dip because we asked the questions that we wanted to get the answers to in the way that would ensure that we got the right answers for our questions. So I'd also add one other insight to that from a practical point of view, which is when you ask questions is as important as the questions that you ask. So our recall of situations, it fundamentally changes over time. And I can prove that to every female member of the audience by saying no woman would ever have a second child if they remembered as clearly the arrival of the birth. And so time changes our perception of events. And that also includes asking questions too early in a process and asking questions to get the answers that we want. So the discussion of voice of the customer earlier, voice of the customer is a really important piece. But what I would say is that according to the great behavioral scientists, people like Dan Ali, Dan Gilbert and co, actually what we do is we make decisions and we say things and then we rationalize them. And we're very seldom telling the truth. So I'd have to say that using empirical measures of behavior, what we actually do, and we've been working recently with some wonderful technology that actually measures the electrical impulses on your skin, are ways in which you can get some clarity. But my biggest concern is that what we really do is we spend a lot of time asking the would you recommend me question. And what we know is that effort makes things difficult and we don't like to waste time on things, but I'm not sure that everybody on this conference call will think I'm such a clever guy that if I recommend them that everybody goes out and buys a Maserati, that you're all going to rush out this afternoon and go and buy one. I am sure that if I say that if you take this trick and use it on your machine, it will be easier, people will try it. But I worry very much, and have always worried about the recommend question, i.e. the entire philosophy of MPS. I don't know, Richard, how you feel about that?
It's interesting that we've looked at some of the academic research into correlation with future growth and different sorts of measures, and we're going to ask the measurement question in a minute. And certainly the academic evidence doesn't show any correlation between future growth and Net Promoter Score, which is an interesting outcome. Other sorts of measurement do have positive correlations. We certainly think that effort is one that's going to be more and more important over time. But the recommend question is interesting. We deal with it quite a lot in health markets. And that's a really interesting question. So after you've been to a hospital, which is not necessarily the most exciting or activity that you really want to indulge in, you will get asked the question, would you recommend this to somebody else? And not many people would recommend hospitals to their friends and family. So it's a very hard question to answer.
See, I find that quite difficult. So I would have a problem with using the MPS question in that context. I also think that I recently did a piece of work relating to a life-changing experience for young people that was scored the same as opening a bank account, and I struggle with that. So,
so we've been asking the question while you've been talking there, which is, do you measure customer emotion in your metrics today? The response to that is 32% do, 62% don't, and surprisingly on this one, only 6% are planning to, which I think ties a bit, Maurice, into your point about, perhaps there's some companies that kind of get it and some people that don't, and there's a bit of a chasm. So we'll just jump back to you, Maurice. I think you were going to be talking about which technology you could use to improve customer experience. We'll just pass the baton. If you can, Lindy can go to slide 6.
That's actually going to go to Richard. If we should just very quickly with regards to emotion. So having a simplified way to express emotion, and making it simple enough that somebody at the front line can explain it to a manager, making it simple enough that everybody in the boardroom can understand the same thing as everybody across the organization is a hugely important piece. And in terms of what one would measure, I've somewhat dissed NPS, though I like Fred Reichel. He's a very engaging guy. I think it's about having a basket of measures, and I think there is no one pure and simple measure, and I think we try and simplify this stuff too much. But I think what we really ought to do is perhaps talk about some of the technologies, and I guess Richard, maybe you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we certainly think that technology can be used to improve the customer experience, and in some cases, technology is the main option, the key option. And for continuous improvement, it's really about having technology as a lodestone that allows you to create improved behavior and better insight. So we appreciate it's a hard world out there. There's lots of different sorts of technology, and within that, there are lots and lots of vendors. This is a Gartner slide that looks at the emerging customer engagement hub. So these are all the technologies that you might want to be pulling together over the next 10 years. And all too often, we find that technology is a sticking plaster, that we want to solve a problem. It's like a jack in the box where we're pushing down a problem in one area, but then it will pop up somewhere else. And so our approach to this is to win solutions up, and we really see that there is a merging convergence between what were historically different technology areas. So contact center and customer engagement, so your traditional CRM, is becoming more and more merged with workforce optimization, and for leading organizations with business process management as well. And so we see this technology alignment, but we also see, and the reason for the jigsaw pieces underneath that, is that quite often you have individual pieces in these technology areas which you try and join up with all the other ones in your organization. So it's a real challenge for organizations to join up their solutions. What we can certainly see is moving forward, silos are on their way out, the join up processes are on their way in, and the technologies need to link up across the entire organization or the customer experience won't improve. And we see lots of this where organizations, they go beyond the call center, and then we're into some sort of fulfillment or some process after a contact. And that's quite often where things break as well. So you might have a class-leading omni-channel way for your customers to engage with you, but then once the phone call is terminated or the web chat ends, it's in a silo of data somewhere that's not acted upon within the rest of the organization. So removing the silos, joining up the data, adding business process management and along with the traditional technologies, we see moving forward very strongly.
So I think that's a tremendously important point, and I have one horrible piece to add to that, which is it's the worst piece of your process that your customers remember. You may deliver a fantastic phone call, you may deliver a great experience, but what people remember is the single worst bit of the experience that you've given them, and they measure you on that. And the whole relationship between our behavior and technology and the way in which that works is it's a hugely important subject, which is why we spend so much time on it at the foundation. But it really is, my best analogy is this: you go and stay in a wonderful hotel, they've spent millions of pounds on renovation, and then the last thing they do is give you the weakest cup of coffee or the worst breakfast that you've ever eaten. And what do you remember about the hotel? It's that goodbye.
And one thing that lots of people will remember, and we even talked about it before we started to get today, is queuing in contact centers. And those of us in the industry, we all have stories about it and how long. You had a 16-minute one, Maurice, that you're recording?
No, you misheard me. I had a 60.
Okay, excellent.
60 minutes waiting in a queue, listening to the same recorded voice telling me how important my call was, and the same badly tuned music coming back to me. And it just got to a point, I guess, a bit of a busman's holiday for me, where I thought, I'm going to hang on until I get an answer. And it was something like 63, 64 minutes. I'd actually recorded the whole thing.
And I think this ties into quite an interesting point about the point I wanted to make about listening to callers every step. The problem we do a lot of listening to calls. We tend to do it just on that part on the right, which is talking to an agent. What we often ignore is the whole IVR and on-hold experience. And one of the things I suggest, if you listen to those calls, the first time I did it was a complete eye-opener. Caller calling in and was speaking to his partner in the background. He said, this system's got 6 F-in options, not an F-in one that suits me. And then as the call continued to hold, he got more and more irate. And then as soon as an agent came through, his whole demeanor changed, and he went from being sort of swearing to be as nice as gold. You'd have missed that if you didn't listen to the caller. And one other thing on IVRs, I think we need to tune up that whole experience. IVRs were designed with something called DTMF. That's these things that come on these buttons here on these phones. And it's very convenient. You can be on the phone and you can press the different buttons. The problem is nowadays we all have smartphones. And so you're talking on the phone, you've got to press an option. You have to take the phone away from your head. You've got to get the keypad up if you can remember how to do it and press the different options. And one of the things we're seeing now is that there has been a complete transformation between how people use fixed phones, which often have these buttons like this, and mobile phones. That changed that overtook in 2010. And now, as we're going on, is order of magnitude different. So a few bits of things to think about there, Richard. And there's different ways of doing it.
If I may just want to add one point to that. So I started working on a thing that people now recognize as visual IVR at about 2009, 2010. And the idea that we can connect an app to the contact center and then put the call through was seen like science fiction when we started looking at it. And now it's really quite easy to deliver. And how much better is that than me having to listen to the repeated message that tells me that you really don't care about my relationship with you?
Yep.
Richard.
And there are some proven technologies out there which will help with customer experience now. We see lots of benefit with CLI routing. So depending upon who the caller is and doing clever things with that. Speech recognition is mature now and is a much better experience for routing calls than a touch tone IVR. And of course, with the mobile paradigm, as Jonty mentioned, talking to devices is much simpler than trying to press buttons. Something that's really simple is just different numbers for different lines of business or different services. And one thing that the graph on the right shows is callback and how that impacts. So this is a contact center. The blue line is the service level per 15-minute interval during the day. So you can see any time that it's below the black horizontal line is when it's below the service level of the 80/20 in this case. With callback, you can make a step change and move that service level well above the line. And because customers remember their experience of being on hold, given a callback option, they actually remember that and they think more highly of the organisation and that's offered.
I also think, and I'm sorry to bang on about behaviour, but what you need to do when you're designing your IVR is to think about the emotional impact. So if it's urgent, put me through to someone quickly. If it's an emergency, put me through to someone quickly. Do not have me sit there listening to a lot of stuff, so that what you're doing is designing a journey where you put through an angry customer to an ill-prepared agent, as I don't think that's very good business.
Another area to really improve experience is to try and remove and reduce repeat calls. And we've had some really interesting statistics from a customer of ours recently where they were able to go through and analyze how many repeat callers they had and then how long was the repeat call. So rather than repeat call as just being in the general pot of call durations, actually drill out and find out, well, these outliers, these repeat calls, how long did they last? And in their experience, they were about 2.5 times the length of a typical inbound call that was handled with first call resolution. So drive down repeat contacts will also reduce headcount requirements, as well as improving that customer experience as well. So that's really a focus on first contact resolution.
You know why repeat calls take longer? There are other reasons, but one of them is because I'm explaining what happened in the previous call, and that's there goes another 45 seconds of agent time times 100,000 calls times whatever. It's simple maths. We are in a mathematical business, but the juxtaposition between the maths and the behavioural science is really simple. I'm going to explain to you why I'm back on the phone again.
And we talked about agent journey mapping earlier on. So one thing that we see, and this is some contact Babel research from the latest the question was asked, how many applications does an agent use during a call? And so we have the pie chart on the right. Now, 7% of respondents to Contact Babel, there was just a single application. But as you can see, the majority of agents are using 3, 4, or 5 applications. And within the Contact Babel research as well, there were also some other outcomes from using multiple applications. So there was a correlation between speed to answer, call abandonment, and post-call wrap-up. So essentially, the more applications you have, there's a very strong correlation with speed to answer, call abandonment, post-call wrap-up. There's certainly something in there. And agent desktops can also combine multiple channels into a single view and provide this 360-degree view of the customer as well. So we would certainly say, have a look at your desktop and look at how many applications the agent is using and whether it's just making things hard for them.
So I think that's a tremendously important point. We've done a fair amount of research on the impact of this on customer experience and on agent experience. And it's a bit like asking someone to solve my problem whilst I'm juggling. I'm more concentrated on the juggling than I am on actually having the conversation. And it is that simple. So, when Richard talks about a single view of the customer and joining all these things together, I would say that these are a hugely important priority.
Richard, you got a point on easy-to-use guides.
Yeah, so if we just move on to the next slide, the question earlier on about whether we mapped process, so I think it was 60% of our respondents mapping process. Unfortunately, process is quite complicated. And we have found really, really good results with agent guidance. So we're not talking about defined scripts here, but we're talking about taking people through the process flow and giving them the information they need at the right time. And these have also, with the best results, been worked with, as we mentioned earlier, with agent advice and input into the process. So we've not just taken a nice flow chart and then automated it. What we've done is we've looked at all of the steps, we've got the agents involved, and then we've translated something that's very complicated into some really easy steps that provide more information. And I've had the good fortune to be a customer actually on the other side of this, dealing with one of our clients, and absolutely perfect experience because they're taking me through what's relevant for me.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm afraid we've just timed out. So we've got one more point, which is quick wins. What we'll do is we're going to come back to quick wins after the webinar. If anyone has time to stay on, we'll watch that. Just going to do a couple of quick tips before we close the before the webinar, which is Matthew says personalised wherever possible. In public sector, we're bound by lots of registration, and it can be difficult to cover complex topics in a personal way. But we still try with things like how we open and close our interactions. Nick says, don't overcomplicate the process. Call products by a name that applies. We have a portal that allows our customers to process credit card transactions online, but we also have a portal that allows customers to get discount on products. That these two portals can often be confused. So if in 1 or 2 words you could say what you liked best about the webinar, if you could put that into the chat room, what did you like best about the webinar? And today's winning tip, which wins either this nice bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates, you get to choose, is Michael39. Michael says, listen to customer feedback and react. Putting fancy tools for users to provide feedback is not as effective if you're not taking actions on the feedback giving. Having a team that gets back to the customer with actions taken on the feedback is key to ensuring they will provide feedback again in the future. Just a reminder, you can watch the replay a little bit later on, callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. If you like to come back at 2 o'clock, we'll be looking at artificial intelligence in the contact center. And I'd just like to thank our speakers. So if you need to dash off, now is the time, but we're just going to move back and we're going to have a brief 5-minute extension where we'll look at some of the quick wins. So let's put the slides up and let's take a look at some of the quick wins.
Okay.
Richard?
So we've got a few quick wins here, and then we've got the 10 ways to improve the service. The first one is to audit the customer experience on each channel. And the simple way to do that is to call your own organization or to try and have a web chat anonymously, perhaps, with your own organization. The second quick win is to use callback. Very easy to implement. Can be done on demand, hosted, very simple and quick to deploy, improves customer experience. And the third quick win that we think here is in terms of web forms. Analyze where people drop off on web forms and also try and check whether you're asking for information that's really necessary at each stage. So there was a point about personal data earlier on, and this is really key to it. Quite often, organizations are asking for data that's not related to the customer's purpose, their goal. And so this causes a bit of a disconnect. Why are you asking me about this stuff? It's not relevant. So have a look at where people drop off on web forms. Is it an address field? Do you really need the address for this form?
So I think there's a great example of that. If I go online somewhere and I want to buy a product, there are organizations who ask me to become a member first or ask me to fill out a form first, and that is not a good experience as a process because I may not end up wanting to buy. But if I've started to buy and I've already processed my order and I'm giving you my address details, adding a small box at the end that says, would you like this to become your membership details and give us a password, is so much better. It's about understanding the behavior elements, the simple behavior elements, and translating that into the technology, not having your technology dictate the behavior. And I think that's the big thing there. I also think that the biggest challenge that we have is trying to express what our culture is as a business, and translating that into the experience that we deliver to the customer. Too often, our culture gets lost in the process maps. Our culture gets lost in the regulatory language, and I do understand that we have an awful lot of regulatory stuff that people on the webinar and people in organizations have to steer their way through, but there still needs to be something that can be expressed in simple language that everyone can understand. And my one big tip is make it simple for everyone to understand, and then you've got yourself a ball game.
And in terms of the really, really quick win, what you can do this afternoon, have a check of your IVR and just see what that's like.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. I've got one question that I'd like to just put to to our panelists, which I think is one that a lot of people have been struggling with, and that is the question: what is the best way to map the agent journey you found without getting far too complex? I suppose you could actually say not just the agent journey, but the customer journey. So, any tips on how to map the agent or customer journey without getting far too complex? Is that possible, Maurice?
So yes, so we talk about 21 layers of customer experience journey mapping, and that sounds very complicated, but actually what we're really talking about is first map what goes on, then ask yourself what the other things are important. Now, we say one of the most important things is what the emotional journey is. So add a layer to that speaks to the emotional journey. We think the complexity or the amount of information involved is important, so add that. We think the relevancy is important, so add that. But for every organization, it's different. So my short answer is this: start with a simple map and then decide what's important and add those layers later. We don't start out with 21 layers that we're trying to complete as a route or a process, because that would be a bad experience. Start to map out what happened and then take it from there. But at the end of every task, go, now what else is important? That's my simple approach.
And Richard, your take, you showed quite a complex customer journey and a simple solution. How would you suggest to map the agent journey without getting far too complex?
Well, the first thing that we do is that we actually sit down and just listen in. Is the very first step that we do. And then it's really a logging exercise to start off with. What's happening, what screens are being used, what information is being captured, what delays are there in terms of process. So really to have a look at the as is scenario. And unfortunately, if you've got a very complex type of interaction, there may be some complexity in that, which is why we had that very complex sort of process chart. But when you drill it down and have a look through each of the steps, then it becomes much, much simpler, and you get down to individual questions, yes, no type questions.
That's where we all disagree. I say map the experience and then add the complexity of the layers. The experience is I then had to go and play with 21 different systems. That's not the same as saying that the experience that I had as a person became more complicated. The experience just got more frustrating, more difficult, less intuitive, and more stressful. But actually, it was only a 2-minute segment of my experience. Simplified customer journey mapping is about mapping the experience, which in most cases is quite short and quite simple, and then building your processes off that and asking how relevant or important those pieces are. Yeah. I guess that's why I think what we do is quite simple in a complicated world.
Yeah, I mean, specifically then we were talking about the agent scenario, and the experience is vital in that. Fortunately or unfortunately, they have to be there for a while. So the retention rates can be a factor. Attrition rates can be a factor. So the emotion and the experience from agents is vital as well. But in terms of how we look at technology to improve the solution,
sure,
we are sat side by side and really doing an audit as the first stage.
I
summarize those points. It would be listen to what's going on, map out the experience, break it down into small steps, and build the process off it. So that's all we've got time for today. Thank you everybody for joining us. And I'd just like to thank our two speakers, Maurice Pentle from the Customer Experience Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John T. A pleasure as always.
And thank you to Richard Farrell from Netcall.
Thank you. Thanks for your time this morning.
And we're going to be online at 2 o'clock or just before 2 o'clock, where we're going to be looking at the impact of artificial intelligence on the contact center. Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye-bye.